Dates in the Bible don't quite match the marriage certificate. Uh-oh.
And hello, America, and welcome to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth on the program where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. Well, it is great to have you along. If you're new to the show, what do we do here? Well, we share great stories. We talk to expert guests who help you figure out how to trace your family history, and we just have a lot of fun. So we're glad to have you. We got some great guests today. First of all, we're going to talk to Lori Erickson. She's an author of a new book called Soul of the Family Tree, Ancestor Stories and the Spirits We Inherit. That's coming up in about 10 minutes. Then later in the show, I'm going to talk to Professor Christopher Magra from the University of Tennessee, talking about the British Navy and impressment and how that impacted the Revolutionary War. This is basically where the British folks would come along and just say, hey, you, and kidnap you and put you on a ship and take you away from your family and friends for who knows how long, totally against your will. It was a long-standing practice, and you'll want to hear that segment. Hey, if you haven't signed up for our weekly Genie newsletter yet, hey, we got a new format coming out. We'd love for you to see it. Just sign up at ExtremeGenes.com or on our Facebook page to get it, and get a blog from me and a couple of links to past and present shows as well. Right now, out to Boston, Massachusetts, where David Allen Lambert is standing by. He's the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. Hello, David.
Can I ask you, do you ever sleep? All this stuff that you got going on with the website and the courses?
Yes.
So I think it's time you tell people about it.
Well, okay. Well, yep, we're doing a new format for the Weekly Genie that's coming out right away. And then very soon on the heels of that, our new website will be unveiled and all bright and shiny. And then we're going to be offering some courses, too, the very basics of genealogy and genetic genealogy, the fundamentals of that as well. So if you wanted to get into DNA and understand how it works and dealing with the matches, we're going to have that up for you here real soon. So pay close attention. We'll let you know when you can get it. So thanks for asking about that.
Call you the genealogy professor.
Ah, there you go. Well, I got to tell you, I'm very excited about this book I've been reading. And this is an old one. I think a lot of people are familiar with it. It's called Team of Rivals from Doris Kearns Goodwin. And she wrote about all these people who ran for president in 1860 in the Republican Party against Lincoln. They lost, and he brought them all into his cabinet and just brilliantly managed all the different personalities and egos and ambitions. So I thought, David, you know, as I read this book, it might be kind of cool to find out how any of these people might be related to me or to my wife, because it just makes for a better read. I don't know if you've ever done that with a history book where you go through and say, hey, am I related to any of these people? So I thought I'd try and do that. I discovered that I'm related to Stephen Douglas a couple of times through Yelverton Crowell and William Huff and Sarah Calkins. And then there's General Sherman and General McClellan and the Vice President Hannibal Hamlin through Henry Howland, who was the father of the Mayflower passenger John Howland. And my wife had Clara Barton and Edwin Stanton and Schuyler Colfax, all these people from the Civil War era. So it was really interesting. And then I decided to go look up, well, what's the tree look like for John Wilkes Booth? And you know what I discovered? Something really interesting.
Oh, what was that?
And that was that there were 8 people named John Wilkes Booth to Booth family members, and presumably not related to that Booth family, but they named their sons John Wilkes after John Wilkes Booth after Lincoln was assassinated. And all 8 of them were born in the South before 1900.
Interesting.
Oh, yeah. And I thought, okay, so they're naming their child after an assassin. And then I thought, okay, there are a lot of people who name their kids after somebody and they give them the full name as first and middle names, and then they add their surname. 38 others were named John Wilkes Booth something. most of those were also from the South. So there were a few actually born in the 20th century as well. So you can really see an indicator of the bitterness of those who were in the former Confederacy in the decades after they got beat. So I write about this in our weekly Genie newsletter this week. I just think it's amazing. By the way, David, I went and looked to see if there were any other assassins that people name their kids after, and I found there was one Native American family that named their son after the assassination of William McKinley. That would be Leon Zolgutz. And they gave him the full name. I guess they were kind of pleased about what he did. And there was someone where the father was named Earl Ray something, and he named his son James Earl Ray something for the assassin of Martin Luther King. But those are the only ones.
Did you find anybody named after Lee Harvey Oswald?
Nope, nobody. Nobody, and nobody after
John Hinckley Jr.?
Nope, and nobody after Charles Guiteau, the Garfield assassin. So isn't that interesting, though, that people would name their kids after an assassin?
Well, that's pretty crazy. Well,
yeah.
Summer has been pretty hot out your part of the country, and it's not been much more pleasant in my part of the world. In fact, on my birthday, it was the hottest day in record in Boston, like 97. So I thought it would be fun to share the wonderful article you have on extremegenes.com on the 8 creative ways people kept cool before air conditioning. I'm not going to go through all of them because I want them to see the story.
Yes.
But fan chairs, a patent from the 19th century, this chair that you rocked that generated a fan above your head, kind of ingenious.
Yeah.
The one that is scary is the sleeping porches and the photograph of this little baby hanging in a mesh net over a tenement window.
Yeah.
That they could have easily climbed around and fell to their death, but it kept them cool.
It did keep them cool, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how the mother kept cool, though. Canvas awnings on buildings. You thought they were just ornamental? No, they actually help people keep cool. Then there was one, I love the description. It says, an immense pressure blower and an ice chamber of tremendous proportions.
Wow.
Good sales pitch items. So the last thing I want to say is summer is here. NEHGS is open. We'd love you to come in, make an appointment. And if you're not a member, go to AmericanAncestors.org and use the coupon code EXTREME and save $20 on your membership.
All right, David, thank you much. We'll catch you at the back end of the show for Ask Us Anything. And coming up next, we're going to talk to author Lori Erickson. She has written a new book called Soul of the Family Tree, Ancestors, Stories, and the Spirits We Inherit. When we return in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Hey Genies, our sponsors at Ancestry have big news. They've completely redesigned the Ancestry mobile app. Now more than ever, the Ancestry app is your Genie travel companion. Check out their new photo line feature where your photos are turned into an amazing collage you can share on social media. Under Discover, check out your daily picks that shows you the most relevant hints to your research and stories and photos that may be on other people's family trees. You can also click on Pick Up Where You Left Off to see the last person you are working on. And all of this works in sync with your desktop at home. And in sync with newspapers.com, find out what happened on this day in history. And if you want to know what happened on a given day in your family history, use the new widget, Events in Your Family Tree, that gives you ancestral birth dates, death anniversaries, and wedding anniversaries. Plus, check out the Maps feature that ties to your family history. Download the new Ancestry mobile app today.
At Legacy Tree Genealogists, we provide families like yours with the stories of your ancestors, a legacy that will be cherished for generations to come. Legacy Tree Genealogists provides genealogy research for clients worldwide, helping them discover their roots and personal history through records, narratives, and DNA analysis. And when your research requires access to on-site archives in the countries your ancestors lived, Legacy Tree Genealogists has researchers in more than 100 countries around the globe who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Legacy Tree Genealogists is the recommended research firm of genealogy industry leaders worldwide, including MyHeritage, 23andMe, and more. Check out what our clients have to say. Absolutely the best. They communicated through the entire process, and my report arrived on time. The story of my family with support recording documents was very fulfilling. Tom G. Google review. Don't wait any longer. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. Legacy Tree Genealogists. We do the research. You enjoy the discoveries.
All right, genies, the masks are off, libraries and archives are opening up, and in part because of the pandemic, there are more records online than ever before. That means more opportunities for you to discover your ancestors and piece together their stories. Hey, it's Fisher, and if you haven't joined the official Extreme Genes Facebook group, Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies, there's never been a better time. Here's your chance to visit online with like-minded genies. This is the place for exchanging ideas on new sources, databases, DNA, and, well, strategies. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies got a whole bunch of genies through the pandemic and will only be better now that things are opening up. It's a great online community that gets better still when you become a part of it. Remember, sometimes it only takes one tip or idea to get your family research where you want it to go. Since it costs you nothing to sign up, why not join us? Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. All right, my next guest on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, is Lori Erickson. And Lori lives in Iowa City, Iowa. She is the author of a brand new book called The Soul of the Family Tree, Ancestors, Stories, and the Spirits We Inherit. Welcome to Extreme Genes, Lori. Great to have you.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
Tell me how you got going on all this, because this is quite an adventuresome book.
Well, the book got started in one sense because I entered my 50s and I started losing family members. My mother died, my brother died. And I think even though genealogy hadn't been an interest of mine before, I think once you start losing living relatives, you become more interested in those who have passed on.
Absolutely.
So that was the impetus for it. And I also am a writer with a longstanding interest in the intersection of travel and spirituality. And I was really struck by the ways in which searching for family roots often involves physical travel and often is a kind of pilgrimage for people. And so I think there's a layer of spirituality in genealogy that hasn't been written about a lot. And so I thought, well, that's what I want to do. So that's what the book is about.
So you went exploring into your Norwegian ancestors, and let's talk about that.
So I grew up in Decorah, Iowa, which is probably the most Norwegian American town in the United States. It was a center for 19th century immigration, sort of a mother colony in lots of ways, and still is a very strongly Norwegian American identity there. And like many people who grow up surrounded by a certain sort of character, I took it for granted and not that interested in it until I started thinking more about my family roots. And then suddenly it became a real source of a real passionate interest for me. Why is the town the way it is? And how did my ancestors contribute to that? And also this larger story of Scandinavia, not just Scandinavian Americans, but also the history of the Vikings.
So did you have any older relatives left that could talk to you at that point? They were all gone at this point.
They were all gone. Yes. And I was really starting from zero in terms of genealogical knowledge. In fact. But I did go to the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, but the real help came from the Norwegian American Genealogical Center in Madison, Wisconsin. And they helped me identify two people in particular. I knew the book couldn't be about all my relatives because, I'm not sure how much of interest that would be to the rest of the world. So I chose two as sort of representative. I picked them somewhat at random off of my family tree because I liked the sound of their names.
What were the names?
Oh, Hans Ulbrich Henriksen Borger and Scylla, some long, and it had all those odd Norwegian vowels, with O with a slash through it and everything. I thought, they sound so Norwegian. But what was a really nice piece of serendipity is that they really turned out to be interesting people to follow.
Sure.
For example, they both were baptized in the most beautiful church in Norway, a Stav church. Looks like this sort of church Vikings would build. It's got dragons coming off the top and everything. And it was such a wonderful coincidence. If I was sort of choosing ancestors to have, I think I would have of chosen ancestors who came from this beautiful part of the fjord country and then this beautiful church. So their story is threaded through the book, but then also cultural history and also this real theme of spirituality.
So had you ever been to Norway before? And did you go?
No. I went with my 2 sons and my husband and my sister. And so it was a real family pilgrimage. And I got the chance to go to this small farm where where Hans, my great-great-grandfather, was basically a sharecropper. He never owned any land. And it's, this tiny, rocky little place. I took a little bit of soil from there, and my husband said I took like half the soil that was there, that it was all rocks. And
why didn't you take the rocks?
Well, because I knew that I wanted to have some soil to sprinkle on Hans and Scylla's graves in Northeast Iowa. And I was really struck by the difference between the rich, fertile soil of Iowa and the rocky soil of Norway.
Right.
It just sort of symbolized the 2 strains of my heritage. So it was actually dirt. I never even thought of the rock. I wanted to have the soil instead.
It's not like you just can get one or the other. You can have both if you want. I've done this before.
That's right. Yeah. But certainly that was one of the most meaningful parts of my genealogical journey, was to stand in the spot where my ancestors had been. And to get there was somewhat of an adventure, and that's described in the book too.
Well, it's really a feeling, isn't it? When you stand where they stood and you walk where they walked and you see the places that they were so familiar with. I mean, there's just such a connection that you have with your people when you do that. I've actually been inside the home of my 4th great-grandparents over in England, because it's a pub now. and so it used to be a butcher shop, but it allowed me to be able to go in there. And then their apartment overhead is where they lived in the 1700s. And I got invited up there. And of course, it looks pretty modern today, but still the building went back to the 1500s. And it's just so astonishing to be in a place like that, especially the first times you've done it.
Right. Well, I think it's really about the power of place, that much of genealogy is about the power of story, I think, and the power of research and imagination. But there's also the power of place. And that's why I think people want to go to a grave, and they want to go to a farm or something concrete that they can touch and relate to.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the debate a lot of people have about, do I get buried or do I get cremated? Because there's no place when you're cremated unless it's everywhere, and that's just too broad, Right. Tell me about some of the conclusions you came to about spirituality and spiritual DNA. You mentioned that in your book.
So one of the things I describe in the book is doing a family tree of my spiritual influences. I'm Christian, I'm an Episcopalian, but I also have wandered in my spiritual path and have gained a lot of inspiration from other faiths, especially Buddhism. And so I put together a family tree of all the influences on me. And I really liked that sense of being connected to and influenced by a lot of different parts of the world and a lot of different people, a lot of wise people, wisdom teachers in many traditions. And so that really got me thinking about the fact that we are a product of our genetics, we're a part of our cultural heritage, but we also are a part of the spiritual beliefs of those who came before us and our own spiritual quest. Part of my book is arguing against sort of extreme individualism, this idea that we are self-made and that we sort of create ourselves out of whole cloth. And instead, I think we should appreciate and at times examine what we're given, because sometimes it's not a positive legacy. And I think sort of confronting that and examining that and looking at the broad sweep of your family, including the cultural ties of it, it gives you a much deeper understanding of who you are. And then I think it also can help you pass on better patterns to your descendants and those that you influence. There's a metaphor from pre-Christian Scandinavia. It relates to weird, W-I-R-D, which is the Old Norse word for something like fate or destiny. And the web of weird was this belief that weird connected everything in the past, in the present, and in the future. I really play with that in my book, this idea that genealogy really is the web of weird. And another fun thing about the web of weird is weird, W-I-R-D, is where we get our word weird, strange.
Okay.
But the Vikings had a much deeper sense of it. Weird in their sense was something that would make the hair rise up on your arms. It was some sort of sensing of a connection that it was a brush with the numinous, with something beyond. So that's what I think genealogy can be, not just connecting with your ancestors, but connecting with something with larger kinds of spiritual forces.
Well, and seeing how they actually help you become who you are. I mean, I've looked back.
Yes.
My father was a well-known musician. He was with the Ed Sullivan Show, and his brother had a big band back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And I looked back to see, well, where did all that come from? And there's a great picture of my grandfather in 1890 in New York in a little drummer boy outfit, and he was playing with the Grand Army of the Republic. And,
wow.
And then I found out that his father's father had actually sung in his church meetings back in the 1830s and 40s. And so you can see this thread of music through the family all the way down to my dad and to my own children, but it skipped me pretty much.
Well,
I don't know why.
In entertainment and larger media. Well, in my case, my example of that is I've always said I'm a descendant of the explorer Lori Erickson, who was the first European to be in North America that we know of, at least. And he was Norwegian, and he loved to travel, and he was adventurous. And I really had him as sort of a role model all the time that I was growing up. And it's somewhat tongue-in-cheek, of course, because I could never claim any real genetic connection to him.
Right.
But this idea that he was an inspiration. He's part of my clan. And then there was a woman, his sister-in-law, Gudrid, the far traveler, who actually ended up even being more of an inspiration through the course of the book. So, yeah, I'm going to continue on my genealogical search, and I certainly have genealogy on my radar now in a way that I never have before. And I think it's fascinating, all the people I didn't realize who are fascinated by tracing their family roots.
So what are the questions now that you wish you had asked your loved ones who've recently passed as a result of all this?
Oh, I wish that I would have asked about what their parents and grandparents talked about their first years in Iowa. What was it like on the boat coming over? Why did they leave? Did they ever have contact with the people that they had left behind? Did they ever see any of their extended relatives? So really about that immigrant era.
She's Lori Erickson. She is the author of The Soul of the Family Tree, Ancestor Stories, and the Spirits We Inherit. Where can you get the book, Lori?
Well, the usual place, of course, Amazon, but your local independent bookstore is a great place. There'll be an audio version of it as well. Kindle, of course, too. So it should be widely available once it comes out on August 24th.
Thanks so much for coming on, Lori. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And coming up on the other side of the break, we're going to talk to Professor Christopher Magra from the University of Tennessee, talking about impressment. Yes, done by the British with their Navy leading up to the Revolution. And you'll want to hear its effect on that when we return in 5 minutes. All right, welcome back, Genies, to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes, and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, and I'm very excited to introduce you to my next guest. He is Professor Christopher Magra. He's with the University of Tennessee. He's a history professor there. And in recent weeks, David Allen Lambert and I were talking about this great article that was based on an article that he had written some years back about naval impressment by the British and how that affected the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. And Professor Magra, thanks so much for coming on. This is a really interesting topic to me because I think many of us have heard about the British basically kidnapping people to put them in their Navy, but I don't think we understood the full extent of it and its impact on history.
I'm happy to be here. Well, most people out there will know that Great Britain had one of the most powerful navies in the world in the 1700s. What a lot of people don't realize is that that Navy was built on the acquisition of labor, and that labor was not always voluntary. The British Navy was not the only Navy to take men by force and force them into military service. Navies across Europe did this. This was common in wartime, even extended into peacetime. But naval captains would be given orders to set sail with a full complement of men. And if they didn't have that full complement of men, they could apply for press warrants that the Admiralty Office provided. that's government sanctioned for you to go into coastal communities. And you're supposed to take men with seafaring experience into military service. At certain times, that was not always possible. And what's known as a hot press occurred, where press gangs led by a British lieutenant would enter into coastal communities and take anybody that they could and anybody that they needed for British warships.
So what was the cost for resisting impressment in that circumstance?
Well, that's the thing. Just about everybody resented this. As you can imagine,
Sure.
You are either taken off of a port before you're about to go to work, you're being taken off of a ship while you are working, and you have your earnings for yourself and your family that yourself and your family depends on. You're being taken away from those earnings and out of your workplace and away from your families and forced into military service for years at a time. And the British Navy had a bad reputation of not paying their men.
Oh, wow.
So not only are you being taken away by force and separated from your families, but also your entire future is up in the air.
And I was reading here in this article that 40% of the British Navy was fulfilled through this impressment process?
Yeah, there are estimates that run between 40 and 70%.
Oh, wow.
I took the conservative figure for the book that I wrote, but estimates run as high as 70%. There's no way to count, and this is one of the difficulties of doing this kind of history. When press gangs took men, they were given a choice. You could be entered onto the ship's muster rolls as a pressed man, meaning you do not agree to this, you don't
Right.
want to be here, and you're serving the British nation against your will. You'll be entered on a muster roll as a pressed man. We'll keep you below decks in chains when you're not working. And when a ship pulls into port, you will not be let off of the warship. Or you can enter into the muster rolls as a volunteer and be allowed to move about the ship at will, and when we pull into port, you can have your liberty to go on shore.
Wow. So how many people ran off then when they went ashore?
Yeah, desertion was rampant in the British Navy throughout the 18th century.
So this was going on long before the Revolution.
Yes, it was.
And this article kind of argues, this story basically leads up to the fact that the Revolution was in part brought on by this kind of behavior by the British government towards its own citizens.
Yes, and I think your listeners will most appreciate the family separation involved in British naval impressment, and they can appreciate the fact that women with children were writing letters to the British Admiralty trying to get their husbands, their brothers, their sons off of these warships. You've taken away our principal bread earner. The entire family is at stake here. And there's a lot of resentment against the institution of impressment. And I want your listeners to remember 3 dates.
Sure.
1708, 1746, and 1775. Those 3 dates I want you to remember. In 1708, the British government bans naval impressment in North America. Wonderful. Fantastic. The act in 1708 is specifically to benefit our economy. It says that naval impressment hurts overseas trade, hurts merchants, and hurts mariners and their families. Wonderful. The British Empire works for us. This is fantastic.
Sure.
It doesn't work for the British Navy, though. They violate the 1708 law every year after it's passed. And Americans continue to petition the British government saying, hey, this thing's still going on. You guys got to do something about it. And other members of the British Empire are doing the same thing. And in 1746, the British government passes a second naval impressment law that bans impressment in the Caribbean to benefit the sugar planters and the sugar plantations in the Caribbean.
Okay.
And Americans are up in arms about this after 1746. They say, what about us? You don't mention anything about North America in the 1746 law.
And you're ignoring the 1708 law, right?
And by the way, that's still on the books. And the very next year, 1747, the British Navy comes down the coast of North America from Halifax, Nova Scotia, from the naval base there. The naval squadron is ordered to the Caribbean to protect sugar planters there. And they don't have enough men. So where do they stop? Between Halifax, Nova Scotia, and the Caribbean. Where do they stop? The principal seaport in North America in 1747 was Boston. So they pull into Boston, and they have a huge hot press in Boston. And Bostonians resist. It's what's known as the Knowles Riot. And Bostonians take over Boston for 3 days. They kidnap British naval officers and they hold them hostage.
Wow.
They say, you will not press our mariners here. And this leads to a whole string of protests, letters to the governor of Massachusetts, letters to Parliament. And in 1775, Parliament says, we've had enough. We are formally legalizing impressment in North America, and we are taking that 1708 Act off of the books.
And there we go. And that takes us right up to the Revolution. And wow, what a mess.
Yeah. John Adams, who is in Boston, and his law partner react to this and talk about the disruption of family life in Boston that occurs as a result of the 1775 Act. Adams refers to it as the Piratical Act.
Yes.
That's meant to plunder America of their husbands, of their sons, of their brothers. And he said that this act, above anything else, has separated America from Great Britain, he thinks, forever. And Adams then serves on a 5-man committee to draft the Declaration of Independence in 1776. And he includes one of the grievances written on the Declaration of Independence pertains to naval impressment, that the British government has constrained our mariners.
This was a much more impactful series of acts than I think we've been led to understand over the years.
That's right. There's long-standing grievances, and there are short-term grievances that caused the American Revolution, like the 1764 Sugar Act, like the 1773 Tea Act. There's also these long-standing, lesser-known grievances, like the 1708, 1746, 1775 impressment acts.
Wow. He's Christopher Magra. He's a professor of history at the University of Tennessee, talking about British naval impressment and what it did leading up to the Revolution. And, of course, later the War of 1812 as well. I wish we had more time to talk about this, Chris. Thank you so much for coming on.
You're very welcome, and I hope your listeners will read more history.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And coming up next, Mr. Lambert returns as we go through another round of Ask Us Anything, answering your questions about family history when we return in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Anytime is a great time to learn more about your family. Did you miss Roots Tech Connect this year? It's not too late to experience Roots Tech classes, keynotes, and how-to content. Just visit rootstech.org to see what you missed and to experience Roots Tech Connect on your own timetable. Select inspiring and insightful messages that will help you in your pursuit to connect with and share your family story in new ways. You can then use the free resources found at FamilySearch.org or the Family Search Family Tree app to have a deeper personal experience getting to know your family, past and present. Connecting with family and learning about your ancestors provides healing, peace, and a sense of belonging. And it's easy to share what you learn with others to help and inspire them as well. Visit rootstech.org for some inspiration or visit FamilySearch.org to continue on your journey of family discovery today. All right, Genies, the masks are off, libraries and archives are opening up, and in part because of the pandemic, there are more records online than ever before. That means more opportunities for you to discover your ancestors and piece together their stories. Hey, it's Fisher, and if you haven't joined the official Extreme Genes Facebook group, Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies, there's never been a better time. Here's your chance to visit online with like-minded Genies. This is the place for exchanging ideas on new sources, databases, DNA, and, well, strategies. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies got a whole bunch of genies through the pandemic and will only be better now that things are opening up. It's a great online community that gets better still when you become a part of it. Remember, sometimes it only takes one tip or idea to get your family research where you want it to go. Since it costs you nothing to sign up, why not join us? Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. news. Hey, Genies, our sponsors at Ancestry have big news. They've completely redesigned the Ancestry mobile app. Now more than ever, the Ancestry app is your Genie travel companion. Check out their new photo line feature where your photos are turned into an amazing collage you can share on social media. Under Discover, check out your daily picks that shows you the most relevant hints to your research and stories and photos that may be on other people's family trees. You can also click on Pick Up Where You Left Off to see the last person you are working on. And all of this works in sync with your desktop at home. And in sync with newspapers.com, find out what happened on this day in history. And if you want to know what happened on a given day in your family history, use the new widget, Events in Your Family Tree, that gives you ancestral birth dates, death anniversaries, and wedding anniversaries. Plus, check out the Maps feature that ties to your family history. Download the new Ancestry mobile app today. All right, on to your questions on Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and extremegenes.com. Fisher here with David Allen Lambert back to answer this question. It's our first question today, David, and it comes from Robert Rust in Denver, Colorado. And he says, hey, Fisher and David, I have a brick wall in my years-long research into my immigrant ancestor, Henry Rust, 1618 to 1684. He was from Norwich, UK, died in Massachusetts. He was made a freeman in Hingham in 1633, and he doesn't appear in Robert Charles Anderson's migration series. And I can't find his ship arrival information or the name of his wife. There was a published family genealogy from about 1899 that names her as Hannah with no maiden or surname. Also, no marriage information has been found. Hingham very early records seem to be lost before about 1640. Whatever help you can give would be appreciated. Cheers, Robert. David, this is your neck of the woods.
Yeah, actually, my Gilman family would have probably attended church with him in Hingham at that very same time, which would make Robert Rust's ancestor friends with Abraham Lincoln's ancestors, because the Lincolns are also from Hingham, Mass. It is very true. The old records for Hingham, a lot of the early ones were lost. However, what puzzles me is that freemanship. So I would love to have Robert contact me at NEHTS. It's really easy to do. If you just look at the staff directory, you'll get all my contact information right there. Because the earliest we know, and this is according to Robert Charles Anderson's Great Migration Directory, Henry is of unknown origin. So we don't know if he's from Norwich. We also don't have a name of a boat, nor do we have him here anytime before 1637. Now, the reason that he would not be included in Robert Charles Anderson's Great Migration series is because that really deals with 1620 to 1635. That being said, genealogy is like wet cement. If you have a record that states that he's there in 1633 and you can pinpoint it to us, I will be more than happy to put you in contact with Mr. Anderson, and we may have a new discovery to share with people. But again, just reach out to me at NEHGS. I'm more than happy to share that with Mr. Anderson for you.
That's a great question, and that's a great answer, too, David, because sometimes we kind of get confused about why they're not showing up in immigration records. And in this case, it sounds like the years might be off by a couple, and he wouldn't fit into that time period.
Right, and that's really all it is. And a lot of times there's early genealogies that are written. Like Albert Rust wrote a book called The Record of the Rust Family, and it was published in 1891. I mean, it's possible that somebody made a conclusion or read a 3 as an 8. So that's possible.
You know, you bring up a really important point here. I see this all the time, especially on Family Search, where somebody goes in and changes information that is much more current, and they quote a book that was written maybe in the 1880s or 90s. And oftentimes those books, they may be old, they may be closer to the ancestors than we are, but those books are loaded with errors in all kinds of families, and we see it all the time.
Well, that's true, because the early 19th century genealogies, of course, we didn't have Family Search and Ancestry and American Ancestors or access to genealogy libraries for most of America. They did it by correspondence. So if somebody says, well, I think my ancestor arrived in 1655, could be they were just guessing that's probably when he arrived. It may not be that they were looking at an actual record or a passenger list. So we can't rely heavily on these 19th and early 20th century genealogies. We have to re-examine their sources, because many of them aren't even cited on the page where the source came from.
That's right. So it's great to have those books, but take it all with a grain of salt. You know, I've seen some books where, for instance, it gave the cause of death for somebody, and how would anybody know that except through a correspondence? But a lot of it, as you say, is basically hearsay. All right, Robert, thanks for the question. We'll have another one coming up on part 2 of Ask Us Anything when we return in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. All right, back for our final question on Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, with David Allen Lambert from the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. And Dave, this question comes from Kurt Lambier in St. Paul, Minnesota. He says, guys, my great-grandfather is thought to have been an orphan. He lived in the Midwest, but the census said he came from New York. So we have thought that maybe he came over on the orphan train. Anything you can tell us on how we can research this man?
Ooh, well, that's interesting, because that New York connection really echoes in perfectly. Well, the orphan train, Fish, operated in the middle part of the 19th century, right through to about the end of World War I. So we've got 1854 to 1919 are the rough dates. And between that time, there were estimated 105,000 children rode the orphan train. And of course, the trains would stop at different towns and cities, and, you know, the kids would be filed out, and then paperwork would be filled up. So there are some forms of paperwork, not so much on the early ones, but you may find something valuable. I always turn to Family Search's wiki. And if you don't know about Family Search, just do FamilySearch.org, and then you can go to their wiki. Their wiki, then just add the word orphan or orphanages, and you'll find this great article on New York orphans and orphanages. And one of the things on it actually has a guide to the records of the Children's Aid Society that cover 1853 to 1947. And this is in the Victor Remmer Historical Archives of the Children's Aid Society, located on East 22nd Street in New York City. And the collection has orphan train records, foster care, adoption programs operating between the 1850s and the 1940s. So this might be a great place to start. The other thing is, maybe there's a court record, Fish, where in the Midwest this person was. Maybe there's an official adoption record. So that's a possibility. The other thing is looking at DNA.
Oh, absolutely. I wanted to go there because I had a friend of mine recently who reached out. His grandfather was an orphan train adoptee, and he had never really used his DNA matches. He's like a lot of people, did the DNA test, thought the ethnicity results is all you really get out of it, and never really looked at the matches or understood how they could be used. So we worked on it. We eliminated all the other known branches and all their descendant matches and figured, okay, these are the people that relate to your grandfather. And we were, in fairly short order, able to identify his second great-grandparents, and then eventually figured out which one of those children, it was a big family from Scotland, which one of them came to New York and became the father of this man. And now once we had that sliver of the DNA puzzle solved, we were able to figure out then who the birth mother was of this man. So DNA is really a huge way to go to find out what their original names may have been. And then, of course, follow their history from there. But when you combine the records, you combine the DNA, this is a solvable thing today, whereas 20 years ago, it was not.
Oh, right, exactly. And things that Family Search has done to digitize and make these finding guides available, it's just tremendous. And of course, with DNA, you pretty much can find people without even knowing the names. You've got the clues right there.
Yeah, that's it. Isn't it amazing? You spit in a tube and all this information.
Out comes a relative.
Yeah, out comes a relative. That's the craziest thing. Dave, thanks so much. And thanks
Absolutely.
also to you, Kurt, for the question. And David, we'll talk to you again next week.
All right, my friend.
All right, and that's our show for this week, Genies. Thanks so much for joining us. Hey, if you missed any of it or want to hear part of it again, you can listen to the podcast on iTunes, iHeartRadio, ExtremeGenes.com, Spotify, and TuneIn Radio. We will talk to you again next week. Thanks for joining us. And remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.